The wind howled across the arid plains, hurling sheets of dust against the steel walls of Outpost 17. Inside, Dr. Elijah Warren sat at his makeshift workstation, eyes squinting at the flickering holoscreen in front of him. The outpost was little more than a rusting research station, one of the last remnants of human settlement on Varkos 3, a planet forsaken by the corporate interests that once mined it dry. The only inhabitants now were wandering traders, scientists too stubborn to leave, and the elusive native species known as the Arkari. Elijah rubbed his temples, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. He hadn't treated a real patient in weeks, just a handful of settlers with minor burns and dehydration. But tonight, that was about to change. A frantic pounding at the airlock door jolted him upright. He grabbed his worn-out medkit and moved quickly, fingers tapping at the manual override. The external sensors showed a single figure cloaked in heavy desert wrappings, their silhouette barely visible through the swirling sandstorm. As the airlock depressurized, the doors slid open, and the figure stumbled inside. The heavy fabric unraveled to reveal an Arkari woman, tall, sinewy, her obsidian-black skin streaked with the pale markings of her people. Her golden eyes locked onto Elijah's, burning with desperation. "Doctor!" Her voice was thick with an accent, the words strained as if human speech was unfamiliar to her tongue. "You must help." Elijah had seen Arkari before, but never this close. They were a secretive race, preferring to keep to their own territories in the deep desert. The fact that one had come here, alone, in the middle of a storm, meant something was terribly wrong. He gestured her inside. "Slow down. What happened?" She took a trembling breath. "My son. He is dying." Elijah wasted no time leading the alien woman to his infirmary, a dimly lit chamber filled with aging medical equipment scavenged from abandoned facilities. As she pulled back her outer garments, he caught sight of the small bundle cradled in her arms. The child, no older than 5, by human estimation, was limp and barely breathing. His dark skin was waxy and cold, his golden eyes half-lidded and unfocused. Strange, dark veins crept up his neck, pulsating faintly beneath the surface. Elijah ran a scanner over the boy, frowning at the erratic readings. His body temperature was plummeting, his vitals dangerously unstable. But it was the composition of his blood that made Elijah's stomach tighten. It was laced with something foreign, something the scanner couldn't identify. I don't know what this is," Elijah admitted. The woman's expression twisted with anguish. "Then he will die." Elijah hesitated. "I didn't say that. I just need time to figure it out." She seized his arm, her grip shockingly strong. "I will do anything," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Anything you ask. Just save him." Her desperation was palpable, raw, and Elijah understood. He had seen too many people beg him to save their loved ones, had watched too many slip through his fingers. He met her gaze. "I'll do everything I can." Hours passed in silence, broken only by the beeping of medical monitors. Elijah analyzed blood samples, tested treatments, and searched every medical database he had access to. Nothing matched the boy's symptoms. It wasn't an infection, nor radiation poisoning, nor any known toxin. But then, as he examined the scans for the 100th time, something caught his eye, a faint, irregular structure embedded deep in the child's chest, pulsing in rhythm with his failing heart. "Elijah," he muttered to himself, "what the hell is that?" The woman, who had refused to leave her son's side, looked up sharply. "What have you found?" Elijah enlarged the image. "There's something inside him, something not organic." The woman stiffened. "An artifact." Elijah frowned. "Artifact?" She hesitated before answering. "A relic from the old world. It was buried beneath the sands. I thought it was safe." His pulse quickened. "You mean this thing didn't come from his body naturally?" She shook her head. "We found it near the ruins 2 days ago. He was playing with it, and then he collapsed." Elijah exhaled sharply. "I need to see it." The storm had passed by the time Elijah and Navara, she had finally given him her name, set out for the ruins. The sun was a cruel, blistering thing overhead, but she led him through the desert with practiced ease. The site was ancient, half-buried structures of smooth, black stone, their surfaces carved with symbols that made Elijah's skin crawl. Navara guided him to the spot where her son had found the artifact. She dug through the sand, revealing a jagged, metallic shard no larger than a human hand. It pulsed with a dim, sickly glow. Elijah hesitated before picking it up. A static charge licked at his skin, and for a brief moment, his vision blurred. He saw flashes of something impossible, towering monoliths, stars shifting in the sky, and whispers in a language he didn't know but somehow understood. He staggered back, his heart hammering. What the hell is this? Navara's expression was grim. It is not of our world. Elijah looked at the artifact, then at her. This was no simple illness. This was something bigger, something ancient, and he had the sickening feeling that they had just woken it up. Elijah clenched the artifact tightly, its strange energy crackling beneath his fingers. The visions had vanished as quickly as they came, but the unease in his gut remained. He had encountered plenty of anomalies during his years working on frontier worlds. Unidentified bacteria, radiation leaks, even the occasional rogue AI malfunction. But this was different. Navara was watching him closely. "You saw something, didn't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elijah hesitated before nodding. "Flashes of, I don't know, places I've never seen, symbols I don't understand. But somehow, I felt like they meant something." Navara's jaw tightened. "It has marked you." The way she said it made his skin prickle. "Marked?" She gestured toward the artifact, still pulsing faintly in his grip. "It is old, older than my people. We do not touch such things." Elijah stared at her. "Then why the hell did you let your son play with it?" Navara's face darkened. "We did not know it was buried there. The desert shifts. Sometimes things emerge that were meant to stay hidden." He turned his gaze back to the shard. Whatever this thing was, it had already infected the boy, creeping through his veins like a silent invader. He couldn't help but wonder, had it done the same to him? "Can we remove it?" Elijah asked. Navara looked at him sharply. "Remove? The object inside your son. If this is what's making him sick, then maybe—" "No," she cut him off, shaking her head. "It is not so simple." "Then explain." She hesitated, her golden eyes unreadable. Then, finally, "If you take it out, he dies." Back at the outpost, Elijah ran another scan on the boy, focusing this time on the alien fragment inside him. The results sent a chill down his spine. The shard wasn't just embedded in his chest, it was growing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, delicate metallic tendrils were threading through the boy's circulatory system, intertwining with his veins, his organs, his brain. Elijah exhaled sharply. This wasn't just an infection. It was a transformation. "Navara," he began carefully, "I don't think this thing is just making him sick. I think it's changing him." Navara's fists clenched. "Then stop it." Elijah rubbed his temple. "I don't know how to stop it. If I try to cut it out, I could kill him. If I leave it, I don't know what he'll become." The boy stirred weakly, his eyelids fluttering. His breathing was shallower now, his skin ice-cold. Time was running out. Elijah grabbed his scanner, running an analysis on his own body. His fingers hovered over the display as the results came in. No foreign structures. No spreading veins. No change in his neural activity. Whatever this artifact was doing to the boy, it hadn't affected Elijah. At least, not yet. But why? Hours passed. Elijah barely left the boy's side, working through every possibility, every treatment, every desperate idea that might keep the child alive. But as the night deepened, exhaustion finally won, and he drifted into an uneasy sleep. It was the whispering that woke him, soft at first, like a distant echo in a vast chamber, then closer, sharper, a voice that wasn't a voice, speaking a language he shouldn't understand. Yet somehow, he did. He opened his eyes. The room was dark, the air still. The medical monitors cast a faint blue glow, their steady beeping the only sound. Then he saw the boy. He was awake, but his eyes, they were no longer golden. They had turned black. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. The child's voice was layered, his normal tone beneath something deeper, something hollow and vast. And then, before Elijah could react, the boy smiled. The monitors screamed, and the lights went out. The darkness in the infirmary was absolute. The power had failed. No flickering emergency lights, no soft hum of the machines, only the mechanical rasp of Elijah's own breath as he fumbled for a light source. His fingers found the handheld scanner on the table, its built-in luminescence casting a pale blue glow across the room. The boy was still smiling. Elijah's pulse hammered. The monitors had flatlined, yet the child sat upright, his small frame unnaturally still. His blackened eyes reflected the scanner's glow, but they were no longer the eyes of a child. Navara, Elijah turned, reaching for the boy's mother, but she was already moving. She stood frozen at the foot of the cot, her breath shallow. Then, without hesitation, she dropped to her knees and pressed her forehead to the floor. Elijah blinked. "What the hell are you doing?" Nivara didn't respond. She was murmuring something, a prayer or a plea, in her native tongue. Her body trembled. The boy tilted his head, the motion slow and deliberate. "Why do you kneel, mother?" Elijah shuddered. The layered voice was wrong, as if something ancient had burrowed beneath the boy's flesh and was now wearing him like a second skin. Navara's fingers clenched against the ground. "Forgive me. I did not know." The boy, or the thing inside him, shifted his gaze to Elijah. "And you, doctor?" Elijah took a cautious step back. "What do you mean?" A flicker of amusement crossed the boy's face. "Do you fear what you do not understand?" Elijah swallowed hard. "I fear what I can't control." The boy's smile widened. "Then you will fear me soon enough." The airlock door groaned as emergency power flickered back online. Dim red lighting bathed the room in an eerie glow. Elijah forced himself to focus. Whatever was happening to the boy, it was tied to the artifact. He needed data, something, anything, to break through this nightmare. He snatched his scanner, running another pass over the child. The results sent a fresh wave of dread through him. The boy's biological composition was changing. His cells, his DNA itself, were unraveling and reassembling, integrating something non-human. His heartbeat had restarted, but its rhythm was erratic, shifting frequencies as if tuning to an unknown signal. Elijah pressed a hand to his temple. "This isn't just an infection. It's rewriting him." Navara rose slowly, her eyes hollow. "It is possession." Elijah looked at her sharply. "Possession?" Her hands trembled. "The old things, they do not die. They wait." The words sent a chill through Elijah. "You mean this has happened before?" She nodded. "Barely. Long ago, before the desert swallowed the ruins." Elijah exhaled, trying to steady himself. "Then there must be a way to stop it." The boy's head snapped toward him. "You assume I want to be stopped." The voice echoed in the small room. The lights flickered again, and then the airlock slammed open on its own. Elijah spun toward the doorway, his stomach lurching. Outside, the desert stretched endless and silent beneath the darkened sky. But something had changed. The sand wasn't still. It was moving. Slow ripples cascaded outward, as if something massive slithered just beneath the surface. A low, humming sound vibrated in Elijah's chest, felt more than heard, like a presence pressing against the edges of reality. Navara took a slow step back, whispering in her native tongue. The boy slid off the cot, his bare feet silent against the floor. He turned toward the open door, lifting his small hand as if in greeting. The sand trembled in response. Elijah's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. "Doctor," the boy said, his voice unervingly calm. "They are coming." The wind outside died abruptly. A silence so profound it felt wrong settled over the outpost. Then, a shape, vast, towering, a silhouette against the stars, shifting like liquid shadow. Elijah couldn't breathe. The whispering returned, louder now, crawling beneath his skin. They had woken something, something that should have stayed buried. Elijah's heartbeat slammed against his ribs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The outpost's airlock gaped open like a wound, revealing the endless desert beyond. But the desert was no longer still. The shifting sands churned in slow, deliberate waves, as though something alive writhed beneath the surface. And above it all, that towering shape loomed, a silhouette darker than the void of space itself, its outline shifting and pulsing like liquid shadow. Elijah's body screamed at him to run. But the boy, no, the thing inside the boy, took a step forward, raising his tiny hand in eerie welcome. Navara grabbed Elijah's wrist in an iron grip. Her breathing was sharp, shallow. "We must close the door," she hissed. Elijah barely heard her. The hum in his skull had deepened into a pressure, an overwhelming presence that pushed at the edges of his mind. Whispers slithered into his thoughts, words in an ancient language he shouldn't understand, yet somehow he did. "Come forth, traveler. The old roads are open once more. The hollow sky remembers." The entity in the sand pulsed, its form shifting as tendrils of black mist unfurled from its core. The boy turned his blackened eyes to Elijah. "They remember you." Elijah's mouth went dry. "What the hell does that mean?" The boy blinked. His expression was unreadable. "You hear them, don't you?" Elijah swallowed hard. He did, but he couldn't. He shouldn't. Then the whispers changed. Now, they were speaking his name. Navara moved, slamming the emergency override on the airlock panel. With a shuddering groan, the heavy doors lurched closed, sealing them away from the shifting nightmare outside. Elijah snapped out of his trance just in time to hear the thud. Something had slammed against the sealed door. A second impact. A third. The outpost shook. Elijah spun toward Navara. "What the hell are those things?" She clenched her fists, her breath unsteady. "They were forgotten. We buried them beneath the sands long ago." She swallowed hard. "But the boy, he is calling them." Elijah turned back to the child, his pulse hammering. The boy stood perfectly still in the dim red light, his black eyes reflecting the emergency glow like polished obsidian. "Stop it," Elijah ordered, forcing his voice to stay even. "Whatever you're doing, stop." The boy tilted his head slightly, as if considering the request. Then, slowly, his lips curled into a smile. "You assume he has a choice." The voice that was not his own whispered. Elijah felt his stomach turn to ice. It wasn't the boy speaking anymore. It was the thing inside him. The pounding at the airlock door stopped. For a brief, agonizing moment, the world was utterly silent. The only sound was the unsteady rasp of Elijah's breath. Then, bang, the airlock dented inward. Nivara grabbed Elijah's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "We have to get out of here." Elijah barely heard her. His focus was locked on the boy, because the whispers had changed again. They weren't just speaking to him anymore. They were inside him. "Elijah Warren, we remember your name. We remember what was promised. The debt remains unpaid." Elijah staggered back, shaking his head. "No," he muttered. "I don't." He stopped, because in that moment, he did remember. Flashes of something buried deep in his subconscious surged to the surface. Impossible images, glimpses of an ancient world, of vast cyclopean structures half buried in alien sands. And himself, standing before them. Before them. No, that wasn't possible. He had never. The whispers slithered deeper into his mind, peeling back the lie. "The hollow sky remembers, traveler. You have walked these sands before, and you shall walk them again." Elijah's breath hitched. His head pounded with something impossible, a memory of a life he had never lived, or a life he had forgotten. The boy, the thing inside the boy, smiled wider. "You're starting to remember, aren't you?" The airlock burst open, and the darkness outside poured in. The airlock door exploded inward, sheared metal screaming as it twisted and collapsed. A gust of freezing wind howled into the outpost, carrying with it a wave of black mist. Not smoke, not dust, but something far worse. It crawled through the air like a living thing, writhing and coiling in unnatural currents. Elijah stumbled backward, shielding his face as the force of it nearly knocked him off his feet. His mind screamed at him to move, to run, but his body refused to obey. Because outside, the sky was breaking. The towering thing in the desert had grown. No longer just a shifting silhouette, its form had solidified into something almost tangible, something vast and writhing. A churning mass of limbs that weren't limbs, eyes that weren't eyes. The horizon warped around it, space itself bending and folding as if the planet's very reality was being undone. Elijah's knees nearly buckled. His lungs ached, not from lack of air, but from something deeper, as though the presence in the sand was pressing against his very existence. Navara screamed. "Elijah!" she shouted, her voice barely piercing the deafening roar of the storm outside. "We have to." A shadow moved. Not the mist, not the thing in the sand. Something else. A long, gnarled limb, if it could be called that, snaked in through the ruined airlock, its surface shifting and rippling as if it were made of living stone and void. And it reached for the boy. Elijah reacted on instinct. He lunged, grabbing the child and yanking him backward just as the limb came down, slamming into the ground where he had stood a second earlier. The impact shattered the reinforced flooring, cracks spiderwebbing outward as the structure groaned in protest. The boy made no sound. He didn't struggle, didn't flinch, because he wasn't afraid. Elijah, however, was. The thing withdrew slightly, its shifting form pulsing as it hesitated, not out of failure, but recognition. The whispers in Elijah's mind deepened, crawling through his thoughts with newfound intensity. "Why do you pull away, traveler? You were meant to return. He is the key." Elijah gritted his teeth, his fingers tightening around the child's arm. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about." The void laughed. Not a sound, but an overwhelming sensation. A cold, crushing weight against his consciousness, as if something vast and eternal found amusement in his ignorance. The limb moved again, reaching for Elijah. A sudden flash of light cut through the darkness. Nivara had moved. In her hands, she clutched a blade, curved and jagged, its surface etched with pulsing symbols that seemed to drink the very air around it. With a snarl, she slashed downward, the weapon cutting into the shadowed limb. A scream erupted, not a sound, but a distortion in the very fabric of reality. The limb recoiled, writhing as it bled something that wasn't liquid, but time itself. Navara grabbed Elijah's arm, her grip like iron. "We have to go." Elijah didn't argue. Together, they ran, racing through the failing corridors of the outpost, the walls trembling as reality itself began to unravel around them. But as they fled, the boy turned his head ever so slightly, his blackened eyes locked onto Elijah's. And in that moment, the whispers spoke only to him. "You cannot run from what you are. You have been here before, and you will return." The boy smiled, and Elijah remembered. They ran through the dimly lit corridors of the outpost, past rusting consoles and failing oxygen scrubbers, past flickering emergency lights that sputtered like dying stars. The walls trembled with each passing second, reality itself shifting in response to the thing outside. Elijah's breath was ragged, his limbs burning, but he didn't slow. His grip on the boy's arm was ironclad. Even as the child refused to struggle, he simply let himself be dragged forward, his blackened eyes reflecting the emergency glow, his lips still curled into that smile. Behind them, the airlock was a gaping wound, the mist crawling inward, alive and searching. The thing outside hadn't followed. Not yet. But Elijah could feel its presence pressing at the edges of his mind. The whispers hadn't stopped. They had changed. Now, they were memories. Flashes of something buried deep, something he had never lived, yet somehow had. A world swallowed by dust. The weight of a blade in his hand. An oath spoken in a language long since lost. Elijah clenched his teeth. No, no, these weren't his memories. They couldn't be. Elijah. Navara's voice snapped him back to reality. She had stopped ahead, standing at the entrance to the outpost's storage chamber. The doors had malfunctioned, stuck halfway open, the mechanical gears grinding uselessly. Elijah surged forward, pushing the boy through first before squeezing inside himself. Navara followed, slamming the override panel in a desperate attempt to force the doors shut. The walls shook again, Outside, something moved in the corridor. The mist had found them. Elijah barely had time to react before the mist poured into the room like living tendrils. It didn't behave like smoke. It was too deliberate, too alive. The way it twisted through the air, reaching for them, testing the boundaries of the space. It was hunting. Navara raised her blade again, her stance rigid. The symbols along its surface pulsed brighter in the mist's presence, as if reacting to the anomaly. The mist hesitated, and then, from within it, a voice. He carries the mark. The whisper didn't come from the boy. It came from everywhere at once. He has forgotten his name. Elijah's spine went rigid. His pulse thundered in his ears. But the hollow sky remembers. A sharp, burning sensation seared across his palm. He flinched, looking down. There was something on his skin. A mark. Not ink, not a wound. Something older, something that had always been there, waiting to be revealed. A symbol. The same symbols etched along Navara's blade. The same symbols carved into the ruins where they had found the artifact. The mist recoiled violently, as if the mark itself had repulsed it. And the voice, for the first time, hesitated. No, not forgotten. Sealed. A silence followed, deep and suffocating. And then, you should not have returned. The mist collapsed inward, as if retreating into itself. Within seconds, it had vanished entirely, slithering back out into the corridor like a living shadow. And just like that, the room was quiet. The only sound was Elijah's own ragged breathing. He turned to Navara, his voice hoarse. What the hell was that? She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at his hand, at the mark. Her eyes, filled with something between horror and understanding, slowly lifted to meet his. And she whispered, "You were one of them." The words struck Elijah harder than any impact. He felt the ground shift beneath him, his breath hitching. What? Navara took a slow step back, gripping her weapon tighter. That mark, it is not a curse. It is a brand. Elijah's thoughts spiraled, pieces of fragmented memory pressing against his mind. That's impossible. I've never. Her eyes hardened. You have. The whispers stirred again. Not in the room. Not in the mist. Inside his own mind. He saw flashes, moments out of time, half-formed memories clawing their way to the surface, standing in the ruins beneath a different sky. A circle of figures, their faces lost to shadow. The pulse of an ancient machine, thrumming with forgotten power. And in all of them, he was there. Elijah stumbled back, his breath coming in sharp gasps. No, he muttered, shaking his head. This isn't real. The boy, silent until now, spoke. You are awakening. His voice wasn't layered anymore. It was soft, knowing. Elijah turned, his heart hammering in his chest. What the hell am I? The child blinked slowly and answered, You were one of the keepers. The words sent a shockwave through Elijah's mind, a buried instinct snapping awake. A keeper. He didn't know what it meant, but his bones did. Nivara inhaled sharply. The keepers are dead, she whispered, lost to the sands before my people were even born. The boy's lips twitched into something like amusement. Not all of them. The words settled into the air like truth. Elijah clenched his fists. Then what happened to them? The child's blackened eyes gleamed. They forgot. A pause. And then, ever so softly, they were made to forget. Elijah's pulse stopped. The symbols on his hand burned, his mind reeling as something vast and unseen shifted in the depths of his subconscious. The whispers stirred once more. You were meant to stay asleep. But now, you are waking up. Elijah's breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. His pulse thundered against his ribs, the weight of the whispers pressing into his skull like fingers digging into his thoughts. You were meant to stay asleep. The symbols on his hand burned, not with heat, but with something deeper, a sensation that pulsed through his very bones, like an unseen current thrumming beneath his skin. Across from him, Navara stood rigid, her golden eyes flicking between the mark on his hand and the boy, whose blackened gaze gleamed with quiet amusement. The silence was suffocating. Then, at last, Elijah spoke. Tell me everything. The boy smiled. I already have. Elijah's fingers curled into fists. The mark was still burning, still pulsing in rhythm with something he couldn't name. His mind was a storm, half-formed memories clawing at the edges of his consciousness, moments that weren't his, yet somehow were. A world lost to sand, a forgotten order, a promise made beneath a dying sky. He squeezed his eyes shut. "I don't," he forced a breath. "I don't remember." The boy cocked his head. "Not yet." Elijah's teeth clenched. "Then make me." The whispering deepened. Not words anymore, something more primal. A sensation like falling, like standing on the precipice of a memory too vast to comprehend. And then, it broke open. He was standing in a temple beneath an alien sky. The air was heavy with the scent of burning incense, thick and spiced, clinging to his lungs with every breath. The walls around him were carved from black stone, etched with symbols that pulsed with a dull, rhythmic glow. He wasn't alone. Figures in dark robes stood in a circle around him, their faces obscured by elaborate masks, smooth, featureless, polished to an unsettling sheen. A voice echoed through the chamber, low and resonant, vibrating in his skull. "Do you swear fealty to the hollow sky?" Elijah felt his own lips move, though the words were not his own. "I do." The figures stepped forward. "Do you accept the burden of remembrance?" "I do." A blade pressed against his palm. "Do you swear to carry the knowledge of the forgotten, even unto death?" "I do." The knife cut deep. Blood dripped onto the stone. The symbols flared, a blinding pulse of golden-white light, searing into his flesh, carving the mark into his skin, branding it into his very existence. "Then rise, keeper of the hollow sky." The figures knelt, and Elijah remembered. Reality snapped back. His knees buckled, his vision swimming as the storage chamber around him lurched back into focus. His breath was ragged, his skin damp with cold sweat. But he knew. He knew what he was. He looked down at the mark on his hand. No longer just a scar, no longer just a meaningless symbol. It was an oath, a promise made eons ago, and he had broken it. Elijah's hands trembled. He turned his gaze to the boy, whose expression had shifted, not just amusement now, but recognition. "You remember." Elijah exhaled sharply. He stopped himself, swallowed. "I was a keeper." The boy nodded. "You were. And now you are waking up." Elijah's mind reeled. He had sworn an oath to remember, to guard something ancient, something that had been buried beneath the sands of time. But he had forgotten. They had made him forget. His throat was dry. "What happened to us?" The boy's blackened gaze darkened further, his expression unreadable. "You tell me." Elijah felt something shift inside him, a pressure in his chest, a weight that had been there all along but had only now begun to stir. The whispers coiled around his thoughts once more. "You betrayed the oath. You sealed the gates. And you left us to rot." Elijah's breath hitched. The whispers weren't just accusing him. They were right. A flash of memory, the temple burning, the screams of the others, the thing in the sand, awakening, and himself, standing before it, whispering words of power, locking it away. He had been the one to seal the forgotten away, and now they were freeing themselves. The mark on his hand burned brighter. Elijah staggered back, gripping his palm as the symbols pulsed, as if reacting to something just beyond the veil. Navara's voice was tight, laced with barely contained horror. "What do they want?" The boy, or the thing wearing him, spoke. "To finish what you started." The outpost shook. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the walls, the sound of something vast shifting beneath the desert. The air thickened, charged with unseen energy, as the sand outside rippled in slow, deliberate waves. Nivara turned toward the shattered airlock, her grip tightening on her blade. "They're coming." Elijah barely heard her. His eyes were locked onto his hand, onto the burning mark that had been dormant for centuries, and now, at last, had awakened. The whispers pressed into his mind. "The seal is broken. The hollow sky will rise again. And this time, you will not run." Elijah's pulse pounded, because the voice wasn't just speaking to him anymore. It was speaking through him. The black mist returned, slithering through the corridors of the outpost like a creeping tide. But this time, it did not reach for him. It bowed before him, and in the distance, beneath the broken sky, the Forgotten Ones began to rise. Elijah stood frozen as the mist knelt before him, bowing like a loyal subject to its returning king. The whispers swelled in his mind, no longer fragmented echoes but a singular, commanding voice. Take your place. The hollow sky rises, and you, Elijah Warren, shall reign once more. Outside, the desert moved, vast waves of sand peeling away to reveal what lay beneath. The shattered remains of an ancient city, long buried, long forgotten. But it was not dead. It was waking up. Towers of black stone emerged, their surfaces pulsing with the same symbols etched into Elijah's hand. Massive monolithic gates, once sealed, now trembled as unseen forces unlocked them. And beyond those gates, they were waiting. The Forgotten Ones. The things Elijah himself had sealed away lifetimes ago. Navara's voice was sharp, desperate. Elijah, don't listen to them. He turned, meeting her gaze. Her golden eyes were wild with fear, her breath unsteady. She had drawn her blade, but she wasn't pointing it at the mist. She was pointing it at him. Elijah, whatever you were before, you are not that anymore, she said, her voice trembling. Fight it. The whispers laughed. You cannot fight what you are. You have always belonged to us. You have always been ours. The symbols on his hand flared, and Elijah felt it, power rushing through him, the weight of an ancient will pressing down, demanding he submit. He could feel the city calling to him. He could feel the Forgotten waiting for his command. The knowledge unfolded inside him like an old, familiar book. All he had to do was say the words. All he had to do was surrender. He could. And for one terrible, shattering moment, he wanted to. Then, a hand grabbed his wrist. Small, cold, unshaking. The boy. He had stepped forward, placing his fingers over Elijah's burning palm. And when he spoke, it was not the voice of the thing inside him, nor the whispers of the Forgotten. It was just him. You don't have to. Elijah inhaled sharply. The words cut through the fog, through the voices clawing at his mind, through the unbearable weight of history pressing down on his soul. For the first time, he saw the truth. He had never been a ruler. He had never been a god. He had been a prisoner. And the Forgotten, the hollow sky, had never been his kingdom. It had been his grave. Elijah broke free. He tore away from the Mark's pull, shoving the boy behind him as he turned to face the shifting mist, the blackened sky, the things waiting beyond the monolithic gates. And for the first time in centuries, a keeper of the hollow sky defied them. No, he said. His voice was his own. I remember what I was. The mist recoiled. Elijah stepped forward. And I remember why I sealed you away. A pulse of power rushed through him. Not theirs, but his. The symbols on his palm flared with burning white light, clashing against the creeping darkness. The mist shrieked, twisting and writhing like a wounded animal. Elijah raised his hand, and he spoke the words. The same words he had spoken lifetimes ago. The words that had sealed the hollow sky once before. The gate closes. The city sleeps. And you will never wake again. The desert screamed. The monolithic gates slammed shut, the runes carved into their surface igniting, locking the Forgotten Ones away once more. The mist howled, its form unraveling, shredding into nothingness. And as the final echoes of the hollow sky faded, the mark on Elijah's hand vanished. It was over. The world was silent. The wind returned. The sand settled. The ruins of the ancient city were swallowed once more beneath the shifting dunes, as if they had never been there at all. Elijah stood in the open airlock, staring out at the endless desert. It was empty. The hollow sky was gone. Nivara lowered her blade, exhaling a shuddering breath. The boy, his eyes no longer black, blinked slowly, confusion settling into his features. Is it done? Elijah nodded. His body ached, exhaustion pulling at his bones, but deep in his chest, in the place where the whispers had once lived, there was nothing. For the first time in ages, the hollow sky was silent. Navara stepped beside him, her voice hesitant. And you? Elijah glanced at his palm. The symbols were gone. The mark had faded. But the memories remained. He would never forget again. He turned to face her, a tired smirk ghosting across his lips. I think I just quit my old job. Navara let out something between a laugh and a sob, shaking her head. The boy smiled, and beneath the endless sky, they turned toward the horizon, toward the future, toward whatever came next. The hollow sky was sealed. The forgotten were buried. But some memories never fade, and some doors never stay closed forever.